Welcome. Today's post is Sedated in Seattle. Published on November 27, 2022. If I were to say a spy agency controls the world, which name would you think of? Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. Sometimes the most interesting thing is what is left unsaid. If I were to say a spy agency controls the world, which name would come to mind? Odds are high it would be the CIA, and if not them then Mossad. Those names have been tied with blackmailing, and how else would you control the world but by blackmail? In fact, from the time Epstein was arrested till today there has been widespread reporting he was associated with Mossad and the CIA. When Maxwell was spotted after he died, she was reading Secret Lives and Deaths of CIA Operatives. There are hundreds of countries that have spy agencies that are designed to be like the CIA and Mossad. Yet only a handful become tied to these conspiracy theories. Why is that? Part of the answer is that the CIA and Mossad are often ranked as number 1 and number 2 spy agencies, so you could argue that they are simply the biggest targets in the room. Plus, it's not just them when it comes to pop culture. In movies, the KGB has frequently been portrayed as bad guys, and there are plenty of Bond movies that present a bad secret agent from the MI6. So it's not just the CIA and Mossad, but the club isn't that big. Part of this is surely just economizing words. It'd be illogical to list of hundreds of intel agencies, and this extends to Q, who called out Mossad and CIA frequently and specifically asserted them as controlling media and politicians. This controlling of media assets is a point to reflect on. I believe any entity that controls the largest portion of media in a country can muscle out any other contenders using that media. It is the gateway to stardom, and that defines who politicians will be, which defines who gets funding, which defines which businesses succeed. Given this, it makes more sense for there to be less players at the top. Media control will also influence buying habits and perception of foreign countries. Therefore, if we were to look at a list of the most favorable countries, might we see the ones most attached to intelligence operations at the top? Isn't that curious? Japan in third place. The Japanese Intelligence Agency. Do you even know the name of it? That'd be the CIA. Or, Public Security Intelligence Agency. Only PS most know relating to Japan is the PlayStation. You are liable to see plenty of Five Eyes names come up when it comes to intel agencies. And some of the most favored lines up with this list. However, much of it does not. There's something else going on here. Let's focus on Japan, as it seems the strongest outlier in that list of favored. America has had a cultural love affair with Japan for decades now. Given that popularity is driven by media and media is pushed by CIA, why is love given to Japan but not to others? You could say it's technology, games, or cars, but those things are also tied to control, typically associated with a covert agency. At least it has in my decoding. You could make the argument that everything is made in China, but China has gotten bad press tied to illegal funding of Clinton and many others. Plus, you can see above, China is on the low end of the country popularity. Even less popular than Russia, though this has changed back and forth over the years. I can't think of any comparable story I've ever read about Japan to the corruption stories I see about China trying to bribe Clinton. If you've been following my posts, you know Japan is connected to secret ops, but the unique position they are in is something I haven't focused on until now. There's a riddle here. Japan connects to secret ops but doesn't get name-dropped by Q or anyone else I can think of. My first hypothesis stems from how Japan was disarmed after World War II. Japan being uniquely non-militarized, in relation to other countries, could imply they are structured differently, including their secret ops. Despite this, they have a dominant position in business and opinion, so how do we reconcile? Let's consider when Japan initially lost that dominant military position. One of the most famous moments in history. The dropping of the atomic bombs. Note the same day this happened Russia invaded Manchuria. Note how most of the papers give more coverage to Russia invading Japan territory than the A-bomb. This is because this was the real, nuclear bomb. This included the Soviets taking North Korea from Japan. For new readers this is surely confusing. What do I mean by Russia invading equals a nuclear bomb? The answer is that nuclear bombs, and many other things, have a secret to them that I must now lay out to continue explaining history. I will demonstrate a pattern with two stories about nuclear that defies any kind of explanation other than comms. August 9, 2019, equals Russia hides a nuclear accident. Plus 1 day. August 10, 2019, equals CIA blackmailer Epstein dead. September 26, 2017, equals Russia hides a nuclear accident. Plus 1 day. September 27, 2017, equals CIA blackmailer Hefner dead. I'm only giving a tiny part of that nuclear post to demonstrate that nuclear symbolism is tied to sex crimes. With Epstein this is obvious as it's literally what he's known most for. Reconcile that with Hefner as he is also often tied to the CIA and blackmail with his parties. I'm always finding new comms that confirm these. In fact this week I found two new ones. The first atom split. Tied to a man nicknamed Pope Enrico Fermi. A recent YouTube documentary goes over how in the 1930s uranium was the end of the periodic table. The heaviest metal there is. Still the heaviest metal that naturally occurs. Enrico, the Pope, was trying to invent a heavier metal. Mussolini wanted to name that new metal after fascism. This is the official story of how nuclear bombs were made. That he rejected Mussolini and instead accepted the Nobel Prize which allowed him to escape the country. When he arrived overseas he found out that his discovery of a heavier metal was a lie, that he had actually made an atom explode. The symbolism being a divergence of groups it seems. Splitting the atom as in disagreements of the cells and then fighting against one another. Literally creating world war over differences. The reason why he was nicknamed the Pope is likely that he was acting as an avatar for the church. When many in the cult disagreed with the actions of Mussolini/Hitler it led to a split in the pre-CIA. The quickest way I can explain nuclear is that if you were going to symbolize a substance that can destroy an entire country, destroy the control over it, it'd be an A-bomb. Child blackmail equals A-bomb because it is the literal way a country is controlled. The material is defined with the most dangerous possible symbolism, nuclear weapons. This is why there were two different types of nuclear weapons used against Japan. One made of plutonium and tied to the Russian invasion. The other made of uranium, called Little Boy, and tied to the removal of the head of the opposition in Congress. Effectively killing any foreign control at the time on the U.S. Congress. Note this man was the Dean of the Senate and leader of opposition to the president at the time. Died same exact day that Enola Gay dropped the Little Boy. This would be a likely fake death as he agreed to remove himself and hand over any strings he held in exchange for not making his blackmail public. He was Teddy Roosevelt's running mate when the Third Party bombed the election in 1912 to get famously racist Woodrow Wilson elected. Now if we assume Hiram Johnson was controlled by Japan, does this also tie Teddy Roosevelt to it as well? Judo. Do you know which president was famous for being into judo? That'd be Teddy Roosevelt. Note when Teddy Roosevelt ended his judo training. April 22, 1904. Robert Oppenheimer born, father of the atomic bomb. Plus 1. April 23, 1904. Teddy Roosevelt officially ends Japanese judo training under Saburo. Nuclear comms are how such blackmail is discussed, and we just so happen to have the father of the A-bomb being born the same day Teddy completes his judo training under Japanese master. It may seem strange if you haven't read many of my posts. Why they would connect ops with a real human being as born. Many people exist specifically as operation symbolism. I have many posts that give examples of this. Big transitions in operations like starting blackmail would be accompanied by the birth of a child who would symbolize the operation. Raising the baby would be used in comms to define the various pieces of the operation publicly without any fear of public awareness. This is meaningful because based on my decodes Teddy was connected to blackmail in ways that were revolutionary. Note South Park comms about it. The founder of the pedophile club that traveled the world. A man so desired by those with power the prior VP was killed to get him a ticket as was the prior president. I've gone into him as a pedophile and symbol of blackmail before, but now it's getting more precise. Know when he began judo? That'd be 1902. Just so happens to be the teddy bear origin date. Teddy is a symbol I've covered frequently. A type of blackmail used involving sedation. The symbol of using a bear for this makes perfect sense when you consider that bears hibernate as in sleeping for long periods of time. No other animal is more associated with sleeping. It ties into Alice in Wonderland and Winnie the Pooh. A child is put to sleep and then people create blackmail that ensures they are loyal forever. This includes much of Hollywood, which is why the most famous show to that point, I Love Lucy, was helmed by a man named Oppenheimer. Same name as the nuke guy. April 22, 1904. Robert Oppenheimer born, father of the atomic bomb. +1. April 23, 1904. Teddy Roosevelt officially ends Japanese judo training. What does it mean for I Love Lucy to be tied to nuclear symbolism? Let's consider the most famous episode. Ranked by TV Guide as the second greatest episode in television history. This is a sequence comm. Water equals info. Check past posts if that's confusing. Frozen water equals unmoving information as in secured. Thus to become stars they have to be blackmailed. Storing frozen information. You go into the freezer and then become a star. Note the very start of the episode involves Ricky, her famous singer husband, shocked at the eggs being naked. Eggs symbolizing a beginning. April 28, 1952. I Love Lucy episode 29, The Freezer. April 28, 1952. Japan officially relinquishes control of North Korea to the USSR. May 5, 1952. I Love Lucy episode 30, Lucy does a TV commercial, most popular episode by far. This was timed to when the USSR took over North Korea. The beginning of NK being tied to blackmail comms. It seems to even predate this as Japan took control of Korea in 1910. Clearly, given their connection to Teddy Roosevelt going all the way back to 1902, they had a tie to the Republican side. Which is why, if we dig a little deeper into that judo connection, it lines up with another prominent Republican settling down in Seattle. Same year Roosevelt began judo and the teddy bear got its start. Note his start with judo was getting his child enrolled. What in Sam Hill? In February 1902, Seattle-based railroad executive Samuel Hill decided that his 9-year-old son, James Nathan, should learn judo, which he had apparently seen or heard about while on a business trip to Japan. This kickstarted Japan's placement in Seattle as they opened a famous dojo. The origin of kindergarten is tied to judo from this, as well as senators and the government of Japan itself. Just like the comms of uranium equals sex and plutonium equals force, the same dichotomy likely holds true of the two largest Japanese martial arts. Karate as force with judo being sex. Judo being flipping people. Check past posts for karate comms. This Seattle connection connecting Japan/judo/Sam Hill is huge, but we'll get into that part a little later. For now, just to note, Sam Hill was rich and prominent and tied to the Republican Party. Specifically with judo, same timeframe as Teddy Roosevelt. He went to Russia 1 year before being tied to Japan in Seattle. This was in a day when world travel was practically unheard of, and this guy went to Russia and then within a year began a partnership with Japan that got them access to the President of the United States. This was the same year the Owl was installed in the White House, as well as the year after the assassination that put Teddy in charge in the first place. Likely Sam Hill was himself a comm tied to blackmail ops that began long before the Japanese connection. Japan simply was one of many that likely got roped into what the UK was doing. Rothschild is based in UK, based on Q posts, and likely through their control there they got Japan and everyone else into it. September 6, 1888, Charles Turner becomes the first bowler to take 250 wickets in an English season. September 6, 1888, Sam Hill marries Mamie Francis Hill, railroad tycoon in Europe. This may give the answer to the symbolism of anti-mame, which I went over in a prior post. I had decoded it as connected to child blackmail, business and Teddy Roosevelt, but until now the name was confusing. This historical footprint extending from the 1800s to well past World War II is likely why the phrase, "what in Sam Hill," is still used. It ties perfectly to those specific blackmail comms. What in the Sam Hill? Someone is too polite to use profanity, so they substitute a similar sounding word. This is just like "leave it to Beaver," it symbolizes a clean outward appearance masking child blackmail. Most major uses in comms are tied to this reality of clean on the outside but dirt hidden. Know who else is connected to Judo plus nuclear? Marie Curie. The woman who discovered radioactivity. Tied to not just Japan and Russia but Israel. July 1, 1934. Smut Code Hollywood. All films released after this date require approval certificate for release. July 4, 1934. Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard patents the chain reaction design for the atomic bomb. July 4, 1934. Marie SS Curie. Russian died radiation at 66. July 4. Nuclear history. +6. July 10, 1934. KGB head Genrikh Yagoda start. Note this timeframe. Smut code just like "what in Sam Hill," covering up the appearance of lewdness. KGB position originated from a man named Felix. That explains the symbolism of that cat I tied strongly to blackmail before. I had decoded Felix as a blackmail symbol in several posts, but only now do I see the origin point. It's perfect. Began the KGB in 1923. Know when Felix began? 1919. And this Disney copy was 1922. The origin of both Disney and Russia's blackmail service tied to the story of a wolf predator hunting a child. I don't want to rehash this decode, so if you are interested. Remember how Japan's ops were originally based in Seattle. One of the most curious comms I've decoded with Japan is their connection to the KGB specifically tied to Seattle. When the KGB dissolved in 1991 due to the USSR collapse, it coincided with Nintendo of Japan purchasing the Seattle Mariners. Note the initials. KGB comms. 1988 Ken Griffey Sr. moved from Reds, Russia, to Mariners. 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. begins in Mariners. December 23, 1991. Nintendo of Japan agrees to buy Seattle Mariners / Ken Griffey Jr. / Sr. stated as thanks for Americans buying Nintendo products. December 25, 1991. Soviet collapse, KGB, Ken Griffey Jr. becomes a top star. Moves to Reds later. I decoded this, and it's clear I'm correct because the patterns match up not just here but afterwards. For example, Ken Griffey was traded from the Mariners to the Reds early 2000 just as former KGB Putin took over Russia. It continues. The same day Ken Griffey Jr. retired, Japan detected a supernova. Collapse star / end of star. May 31, 2010. Ken Griffey Jr. final game before surprise retirement. May 31, 2010. Japan detects supernova 17. There's even more, but you get the point. The connection is strong, but what does it mean in precise terms? Why did Japan seemingly pick up the KGB? What does this mean? The connection to the Reds to Russia is obvious, but why Seattle for Japan? We already covered the Judo connection, but there is a logical position reason too, because Seattle is the closest port to Japan. With all this in mind, with Russia and Japan tied to nuclear comms, perhaps it's not a surprise then the largest nuclear disasters were Fukushima and Chernobyl. Japan and Russia. Consider the symbolism of two countries working together. What is the most popular symbol of that in pop culture? The Olympics. What is the symbol of the Olympics? It has a collection of rings all connected. Ring symbolism being control. How is control attained? That'd be blackmail. People get a voice by making sure they can never cross the ones with strings with that voice. What groups are most famously associated with blackmail? That'd be the CIA/Mossad/KGB. But never Japan. Why is that? Let's consider Chernobyl. August 15, 1972. USSR Chernobyl construction begins. August 26, 1972. Olympics begin in Germany with the return of Judo, with Wim Ruska being first to win 2 gold medals. It included the return of Japanese Judo to Olympics. Judo being a martial art of flipping people onto the ground. Note also a man named Ruska being the top man in Judo. Born on the same day color TV broadcasting was first demonstrated. He was from the Netherlands, winning 2 gold medals in Germany. Note Netherlands is right beside Germany, which was half controlled by the USSR at the time. I believe this indicates a cooperation, the proximity allowing multiple parties access to the blackmail. This may seem counterproductive, but we have to take a step back to understand how global connections are facilitated. Sports either coordinate intel agencies or act as markers for them. When we look at the comms tied to the origins. Naps and Spiders with Cy Young. April 21, 1904. Ty Cobb makes his pro debut for Augusta, South Atlantic League. April 22, 1904. Robert Oppenheimer born. April 23, 1904. Teddy Roosevelt ends Japanese judo training under Saburo. April 23, 1904. American Academy of Arts and Letters forms. April 23, 1904. Teddy Roosevelt thanks to 10th Dan teacher letter ending judo teaching. April 28, 1904. 50 years prior Red Steel Calm. May 5, 1904. Cy Young perfect game, first MLB perfect game. Ty Cobb also connects most famous athlete before Babe Ruth, and we see Ty connecting with Cy. Let's consider another sport. When did football become more popular than baseball? What star is tied to this? Johnny Unitas. The more popular a thing is, the more likely it is associated with an important comm. The best player in the most popular sport is likely to have a meaningful symbol that can unlock history. Football is the most popular sport in America, and its ascent into popularity came around the 50s when the best quarterback by most accounts was Johnny Unitas. The greatest game ever played was one of his games, and it is tied to the rise of football's popularity. Just so happened to have a thrilling game at the exact time they needed to, as NBC picked up the game, to make it popular. That was the purpose. One of many reasons games are rigged is to create a drama. However, that cheating is also used to send messaging. When I look up his history, there's a famous story of his that was suddenly learned to be a lie. That his first game was October 21st when it was really October 6th. October 6, 1956. Johnny Unitas' first game secret. October 17, 1956. 13-year-old Bobby Fischer match of the century. Donald Byrne Chess Club NYC move 17 Queen sacrifice. October 19, 1956. Soviet-Japanese joint declaration of 1956 is signed, ending the state of war between the two nations. October 21, 1956. Johnny Unitas comms first game. What kind of name is Johnny Unitas? Unitas equals United? Initials J plus U? Perhaps J equals Japan. U equals USSR. Unite US. Tying to when Russia and Japan went from enemies to friends in control over US. I think so. The deeper meaning of this is understood as we reconcile Hollywood. At the time of Johnny Unitas beginning, several other Johnnies were also starting legendary careers. Of particular note is Johnny Carson as the most famous late-night host of all time. His job is literally tied to making stars. By introducing new acts to the world, they act as a gateway. It's how Elvis and many other stars got their start. Note: Johnny B. Good, the most famous Johnny song recording began within a month of Johnny Carson beginning. A song that has these lyrics. Many people coming from miles around to hear you play your music when the sun goes down, maybe someday your name will be in lights saying, Johnny B. Good tonight. As in The Tonight Show. The "maybe someday" is a reference to it being a long-form plan. Johnny Carson didn't become the big gateway until many years after 1955. This makes sense because the whole point of Johnny Unitas was in uniting, and he made his debut in 1956. Thus these were ops to unite specifically because they weren't working together before this. Prior to Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, the big show to introduce new stars was the Red Skelton Show, which Johnny Carson worked on. Skeleton equals skeleton, symbolizing the structure. The point is, all of this is planned out long in advance and marked. Note the first track of the Johnny B. Good album, Maybelline, a song about a cheating woman with the name of a popular cosmetic brand. This is a sequence as first you get blackmailed, Maybelline, and then stardom. So this is a control over Hollywood and ties strongly into the business world as products rely on media to define which succeed and fail. Japan seems to have been recruited by the USSR during these years to handle the technology portion of blackmailing Hollywood. I suspect this friendship hit a few bumps in the road around the same years of Chernobyl. That was the time frame of Tetris. Switching from Robert Maxwell to Nintendo and becoming the best-selling game of all time. Nintendo took over the industry in part due to a toy called Teddy. Teddy Ruxpin, a recorder built into a teddy bear, paved the way for a Japanese takeover of the gaming industry. Same year Chernobyl. Possibly a transition point in their relationship. Quarterback class being 1983, note the connection of Dan Constantine Marino with Johnny Constantine Unitas. Constantine. I don't think that's a common middle name to have. For two of the most famous quarterbacks of all time to share it could imply a connection. Of course, I need to decode both Constantine and the unique names. I believe that Dan is a reference to Judo. Symbolism of flipping expertise. I also include the most famous Dan Marino Hollywood moment, as he was a major plot point in the Ace Ventura film. The film that made Jim Carrey a big star. A film about finding a dolphin named Snowflake through finding a broken ring. Dolphin symbolizes clicking and is used both for TV viewership symbolism and internet use. It fits with the generational change discussed before, as everything was transitioning online. Anyway, the connection of middle name ties the two generation changes together. Unitas connecting Japan/USSR before and again, at least in parts, the J/U initials being Japan and USSR, perhaps. February 6, 2005. Super Bowl New England Patriots, Tom Brady wins third Super Bowl in 4 years. February 7, 2005. Constantine film debut. Brady equals Brady evidence, which is a symbol of evidence holding. But why Constantine? Constantine equals first Roman emperor that converted to Christianity. Let's not forget the church connection to secret ops. The meaning being the network attached to clergy around the world that act in ops. Most obvious historically in the hiding of Nazis and moving them into safety after World War II. However, this is, as I've gone into many times, the likely origins of the CIA structure. Having a regular job and then having a CIA secret life. Clergy is a perfect cover as they move into countries for humanitarian purposes, handle children, and listen to confessions, which give intel on crimes. You'd be hard-pressed to think of a better global structure for a cult. However, to understand this connection, let's get into Constantine itself. Constantine. Note the character was inspired by Sting of the Police. This fits perfectly. Police origin of a band ties to the father of the primary band leaders. Father who was one of the CIA's founders, and after he left formed his own private CIA. Nobody knows more about changing governments by force or otherwise than me. I've decoded them before, but now we see more clarification. The private CIA symbolizes the next generation, as in the kids taking over. Symbolized with his own kids becoming one of the most popular bands in the world. They also have famous songs about watching people, and a particularly famous one about a hooker named Roxanne turning on the red light. Thus the symbol of Constantine is being born into the life rather than joining. Symbol of a son of CIA rather than recruitment. This is the symbolism of Constantine perfectly, as his entire character is partly defined by his frustration at being forced to see horrible things growing up that nobody else could. If you remember my Keanu Reeves post, then you may recall the symbolism of his name tied into the origin of mass media. Reeves was the name of the guy that kicked off the Jack the Ripper story. When reconciled with other famous Reeves, like the original two Superman actors, this fits, as Superman works at the newspaper. His symbol is tied to mass media. Secretly being an alien, foreign affiliation like USSR, being from Krypton, as in blackmailed, hence why it robs him of his powers when found. September 19, 1952. Adventures of Superman starring George Reeves debut. September 25, 1952. Christopher Reeve born, within 1 week. May 26, 1995. Keanu Reeves stars in Johnny Mnemonic. May 27, 1995. Christopher Reeve paralyzed. All of these fit the symbol of someone born into that secret world. The transition between Christopher Reeve and Keanu Reeves was the symbol of the internet taking over print media in the future as the vehicle for stardom. Johnny. Check my Keanu Reeves post for more of that. The point of casting Keanu Reeves as Constantine is in cult-born people working behind the computer tied to ops. This is why Keanu needs a mirror to pull a demon out. Mirror symbolizes remote monitoring, as the cameras to computer act as a mirror. Note in this film there are secret messages via Windows. Constantine educates about the secret 17th act. Q and teaches someone how to see demons by using water. The story involves a girl trying to get her sister switched from hell to heaven. I believe in both cases we are dealing with symbolism. Hell in this film's case is a mental hospital. So psychological demons. Demons the sister admits to helping cultivate when younger. So this is an MK story. Constantine uses the power of a cat's eye to see hell while he submerges his feet in water. This could be symbolism of finding someone close to afflicted, in either case she is in hell, and he brings back the hospital wristband of the sister from hell to prove it. So this is an MK story, and there is a great description of how demons operate in that world. That they intentionally act indirectly. That we are puppets they whisper into the ears of. They brainwash but can't directly do anything. Those that break that rule and act directly get punished. They find people capable of terrible things, mental illness, and then give just the right nudge to turn them into a demon. It's a logical way to describe the nuances of the MK system. They are called influence peddlers in this film. It's all about abuse, but in the end the most important part of that system is that the abusers are shielded. They don't directly force the target to shoot up a school, they simply nudge them ever closer to that goal. This way the truly guilty parties that long masterminded it remain not just free of charges but greatly rewarded. They are used to keeping people from snitching, to create distractions, to light fires for federal funding. There is no end to what a programmed human can be used for. It's the sacrifice that gains initial entry to many involved. And that world is a big one with people all over the world. Many of them at the lower levels are tied into surveilling either blackmail, uranium/sex, or a mentally ill person conditioned to act, plutonium/force. The blackmail they surveil is often using their own family, and the same is true of the mentally ill person. The amount of computers and data transfer for this task is massive, and this is why during the proto-internet days the quarterback class was launched. As this represented the framework being set up as tech was revolutionized. Prior to the 80s the Miami Dolphins symbolized the TV remote. In my dolphin post I go over a ton of comms to demonstrate this, as their most famous win streaks perfectly align with famous TV shows having record-breaking runs on ratings. Effectively, their win streaks represented TV domination, acting as a scorecard for those behind the scenes to cheer as they successfully herded the sheep around the world to watch whatever show was defined as it. This changed with the tech revolution, and notice on the right in the image above. That's Johnny Mnemonic, and the finale involves Reeves as Johnny using a dolphin to relay data to the masses. Symbolism of the Internet. Clicking symbol of a dolphin works even better for computers than it does a remote. Dan Marino was only one of several of that famous quarterback class of 1983. Who was the most famous? Easily John A. Elway, the Denver Broncos quarterback. Elway initials are J. Potentially a symbol to Japanese data transfer, they were one of 9 companies tied to the origin of HDMI cables. The most likely cable you have for both TV and computer right now. Note they began globalization in 1977. The year Q clearance began through the DOE. They globalized in 1977 but began January 19, 1953. Which just so happens to be when I Love Lucy was featured on the first issue of TV Guide. The most expensive baby in the world. John Elway is synonymous with Denver, and when talking about Denver as a comm I have to bring up DIA. The famous bunker tied to CIA data storage. Note the J stands for Japan Aviation Industry. Like the Denver International Airport. So this appears to be a transition of operations involving data management. In my Keanu Reeves post I further decode the mascot demon horse of DIA to a merger between Nintendo and Sony in the early 90s. It's not crucial enough to go into here, but I just wanted to make it clear the way these comms loop around. How is data moved around? Computers. Which computers? Depends on the year and purpose. The only official ones confirmed would be the TRS-77s of the Finders cult. Early phone-connected computers. Pre-internet phone lines were used to coordinate children and footage of them nude. Specifically bringing kids to places with more lax laws like Mexico. This was the same timeframe Apple began. I can't fit the entire history of my decodes here, so let's skip ahead. There is a lot of evolution in this tech, and by 1997 the new OS that offered maximum anonymity for these data ops was called GNOMES. This is why when we look at this timeframe. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997, GNOME Primary OS for Linux debut. August 15, 1997, Full Monty, new employment by stripping. Include scene with GNOME that decides job, leave your hat on. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, GNOME's episode, South Park 17. It becomes clear there were numerous comms prepared to mark this new OS. Effectively acting as promotion for people to get involved in ops at the ground level. When I decoded this before I focused on the surveillance tied into music and clarified by South Park. In both cases it clarified that surveillance was tied to blackmailing using sedation so as to avoid witnesses. JZZZ. However, this week, due to a great reader tip, I learned that the very same day GNOMES was released, the film The Full Monty was released, which involved a whole subplot with GNOMES. Shown above. This film, much like South Park, was incredibly popular despite low production and extremely low expectations, being the top UK film until Titanic. I will be covering that film extensively later, but the crucial point for now is the most basic symbolism. The Full Monty. A film about regular men deciding to copy Chippendales and strip as a job. This is a comm of allowing exposure, as in setting up surveillance for a third party far away to watch. This is likely what GNOME's OS allowed. Note also the finale of the film involved a song, You Can Keep Your Hat On. As this represents the red hat that funded the GNOME's OS. I decoded several episodes of South Park, but I didn't cover the first episode. Obviously I should, as it was timed to the OS release date. So, what was the primary thing to take from that first episode? Note the show begins with kicking a baby like a football. Note the character kicking the baby, Ike, as a football has initials KB and his father GB, KGB, comms. Like the Ken Griffey comms. Note the father turned himself into a dolphin. Elf/dwarf symbolism. Clicking, computer symbol. So why was the brother, Ike, being kicked as a football? Remember Johnny Unitas tied to Russia plus Japan unity. Well, when was he playing football? Who was president? That'd be Ike. The symbol of one party giving data to another. Also tied to Lord of the Rings symbolism. As there was significant resistance to the changes going on. I.e. the US government applying rings to control people through sex, uranium/blackmail, and force, MK/plutonium. Control symbolism, and that is done by blackmail. Which is perhaps why his son's career as a sports writer ended within one day of Ken Griffey's senior debut. The avatar of KGB symbolism in baseball. August 25, 1973, Ken Griffey senior debut. August 26, 1973, David Eisenhower writes his last sports column. August 26, 1973, 10-year-old Mary Boitano is first woman to win 6.8-mile Dipsea race in Marin County, beating a field of 1,500 runners. That Boitano symbol helps explain the South Park prevalence of Brian Boitano. Ice skating once again, water equals info, so this is symbolism of unmoving information. Appeared in the original short of South Park and displayed prominently in the original opening, and in the South Park movie had a full song dedicated to him as a hero. Note also that same day a 10-year-old girl named Mary Boitano famously wins the Dipsea race. Mary equals ring equals control by 10-year-old plus camera. Note Eisenhower's son was born in Denver. The President Eisenhower had a heart attack there. 1955 U.S. President Eisenhower suffers a heart attack on vacation in Denver. 1973 Eisenhower Tunnel, highest and longest U.S. mountain tunnel, opens 60 kilometers west of Denver, Colorado. As we keep returning to South Park, let's go over that show's origin before we go over the full Monty. Both are tied to gnomes. Note the end of the original pilot of South Park had the football, Ike, kicked by Kyle into Cartman's window. This is symbolic of surveillance of him. Of all fictional characters, I can't think of any that more perfectly represents an MK subject than Eric Theodore Cartman. E.T. So for the ending to be defined by Ike sent through a window, Microsoft Windows, of Cartman equals spying using gnomes of dangerous individuals. I also highlight Schwartz above as in Soros symbolism, as his original name is literally Schwartz, but I've covered that com in enough posts, so before we go into the full Monty, let's focus on that South Park debut. South Park debut, Ike. The opening song shows 3 of the 4 boys being put together. It does not show Kyle being put together. The symbolism likely being in watching the development of dangerous future people. This explains why Kyle is the only one exempt, as well as why he's portrayed in the film as a computer hacker. I put the transcript of the film where Kyle B uses his dad's Gerald B, KGB, computer to hack a message for a terrorist organization. The very next part of the opening has the mother of Eric, Teddy Cartman, with cookies, tracking, while the audience is shot, symbolism perhaps of being caught on tape with Teddy. Though I'll get more into that later. The title scroll ends with Ike being kicked into South Park sign. The symbolism of the op itself, with the abuse of the football-headed child symbolizing sending information about abused children to a third party, using gnomes. This leads into the very first scene, which involves a long conversation where the boys learn the word dildo. This is the kind of thing clown kids would try and get MK kids to associate with /obsess, giving positive enforcement in the middle of years of bullying. When I get into the full Monty film, a key part of the story is the father forcing his young son into a strip show and stealing. These kids abuse each other because it's expected of them. Directed by family. In a way they too are victims, but they aren't the ones destined to live in hell. You might wonder how teaching dildo to an MK child could be abuse, but you have to understand how mentally unstable they already were. The child is taught to become obsessed with the word just as Cartman does in this episode as he repeats it in every other scene. IRL they might build snow dildos and focus their entire identity around it. I say this because I knew an MK kid that did exactly that. They obsessed over the word to a point of literal mania while living in Colorado before this show was first aired. I would not be shocked if what I saw then was the same thing that was recorded and watched to inspire the running gag in the first episode. Though I'm sure what I saw was just one of many cells running the same marching order, so it's not what I know that is specifically tied to it, only that I had a proximity to the same operations that were so effective they became the opening joke of South Park. The show marking the surveillance of brainwashing operations. I try to keep this blog divorced of my history, but I suppose I have to give some context here. There are times in these posts when I talk about either my own history in third person or the history of someone I know. I met several people who were MK'd because I was introduced to them when I started to get involved in these ops. I was MK'd myself and suicidal for long stretches of time. There were attempts over the course of years to get me to become a monster in multiple ways. The fact that I overcame all of that and live as optimistically as possible despite that past might be why I'm allowed to make these posts, though I have no idea for sure. Despite that optimism, I'm well aware my brain is broken in a few ways due to past trauma, but unlike most victims of MK, they aren't the kind of ways that are perceptible in text. There are plenty of smart monsters in the world, so my intelligence means nothing in regard to being picked for brainwashing. The most important attribute is being programmable, and I fit that bill as a kid. Heck, Cartman is often at a genius level, and he's a poster child for a fictional monster. Part of what I do here is therapy, as it helps me work out so much of my own past which I long believed was incomparable to others. It comforts me to know what I wasn't alone in suffering. I used to think the universe had manipulated the maximum level of pain possible for me, and I realize I wasn't far off, as it was indeed intentional and calculated to break me. I remember so many choices I made and the reactions to them that never made sense. Now that I recognize they were spying on me and trying to traumatize, it all clicks. So they use Ike's little brother as a club to beat Cartman and then literally kick him as a football into 4 mailboxes. Symbolism of data transfer. Ike is symbolized not just by a football but in other episodes a trash can, and this tells me the symbol is tied to computer evidence being sent, as the trash is how these things happen. Nothing is ever truly deleted, as Q once said. The next part has an alien stuffing something into Eric Theodore Cartman's behind. Symbol of being raped, and while usually this is done under sedation, there are accidents at times given it is done in regular homes. Note his mother assured him it was a dream, as this is the person who is profiting from his abuse. Remember that Cartman's middle name is Theodore. As in Teddy. The symbolism is of not just sacrificed but of a child used for blackmail without their awareness due to sleep. Note Cartman's mother asserts he is making bears, and that he has a bear recorder which he uses to catch a hopeful adult rock star kissing and trying to rape a child. This was the first of the Meteor Shower trilogy. Check Red Hat post for an extensive decode on this. July 13, 1999. Red Hat buys Atomic Vision United States web design. July 14, 1999. South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 1, Cat Orgy. July 28, 1999. South Park Meteor Shower Trilogy Part 3. Jubilee. July 30, 1999. Red Hat buys Deluxe Computer GmbH Linux DIV Germany Computers and Software. The symbol of a sacrificed child is both of abortion and adoption. Abortion because the child is discarded and likely to die, but adoption because they don't do it themselves but instead enroll them into the MK program where others become their guides. Effectively their new parents. This plays out in the second half of the season finale, where Cartman sleeps her way up to Clinton to get an abortion, only to realize she really wanted adoption. In reality, it's the same symbol as the child is sacrificed but adopted by people who intend to brainwash. This is why the big reveal in that episode that despite being a whore who has slept with the entire town, the mother of Eric Cartman secretly has a penis. Note the very next episode after that is about the penis of a small child. This clarifies for people who didn't get the symbolism of this finale what they were referring to by making her a man. It was a poorly received episode as people didn't get it. Without comms, it makes no sense at all how the most famous prostitute who sleeps with everyone also secretly has a penis that she uses, but nobody knows about. It's fundamentally contradictory to the established story, but as a comm it makes sense. The symbol being as a prostitute she secretly sells her son. Hence she has a secret penis. I'll get more into that episode later, but for now this episode has Cartman in denial about being raped. Or I suppose being anally probed, which actually also works as a double symbol for being examined more closely. Just like the full Monty symbolism as in more exposure. Alien stuck stuff up your ass. Note Chef has the symbol of an alien as well on his back, which shocks Cartman. This ties into everyone being connected with this blackmail, as Chef was one of the people who slept with Leanne. Note the one that slept with her just before it was a Native American who calls his mother a bear with wide canyon, and then, doe who cannot keep legs together, those being jokes about teddy bear and DOE/Q clearance. Note how Cartman switches to Chef as soon as the man vomits. This will become more clear as a symbol later. Kyle kicks Ike through the school bus windows, and then the aliens take Ike away. The meaning here is in losing the op. Perhaps because he was using Windows rather than GNOME. The whole point as I went through before is that this was about switching OS. So this makes sense, but it's less clear to me. I think that's why Ike goes through both windows as rather than spying the data is being picked up. The next bit about rabbits eating lettuce equals symbol of money/funding. Symbol in this case of losing funding due to losing Ike. This is what his family wanted him to be involved in these ops as it props them up. The subplot about cows being mutilated, Black Army CIA helicopters and trucks being seen. Bar Brady. Brady evident symbolism. Which is why he constantly acts as a deterrent to anything funny going on. Effectively keeping things hidden, and his incompetence is part of this. They get to school and talk of Christopher Columbus discovering America while a gorilla is shown. Symbolism of discovering America. As in discovering the insides of homes of America. A brand new expedition. The rest is also comms but less clear to me. I have gathered that Napoleon is occasionally used to reference the sleep sex ops. Nap. Note his prior excuse, prostate tumor, symbolism of something deadly inside the butt. And Cartman begins farting fire as they openly talk about his sexual abuse, lighting the British Pip on fire. Consider that in reference to the full Monty UK. Making the abuse public and then someone poor from the UK gets lit on fire. The cows try and escape Brady in the subplot. I believe the point here is of industry professionals that are comms aware and pawns in a larger game. South Park itself has the sports team of the cows, so the cows symbolize those involved as the strings are trying to keep people in line. I mentioned before the vomit symbolism tied to Cartman's mother sleeping with men and then switching to Chef, and note Stan's defining characteristic in the earliest episodes is to vomit when he is aroused. He vomits every time Wendy is nearby. Same symbolism as Cartman. Wendy Testaburger. Wendy is I believe a knockoff comm of Alice. Peter Pan and Wendy. Drugging kids and teddy bears. Teaching to fly equals become stars on radio/film broadcasted long distances, reward for participation. As for Wendy plus burger. Symbolism of readily available fast food anywhere. Both tied to the same ops but one being rich and the other being readily available. Alice equals all ice, symbol of unmoving water. Preserved. Hence Linux Penguin. Which brings us back to gnomes as the OS. Using these systems is tied to preserving information and not making it public. To be a part of that system they also have to be blackmailed for security, and so it leads to the entire thing being blackmailed and needing that many requires, Wendy. As in readily available girls across the country as if it were fast food to order quickly. As they discuss Stan wanting Wendy, how do you know she has a cat? They discuss not being believed in relation to alien abduction. Chef begins singing his first song. About having sex with a woman, a song that Stan emulates and attempts to achieve with Wendy later in the episode. Giant robot eye pops out of Cartman's behind and Chef takes it as a sign they want to communicate. This is all about switching OS as described, so this fits right in with that. Kyle wanting to get his job back to help out his parents. Note when Kyle asks, "How do we get my little brother back?" they pass by Tom's rhinoplasty nose job equals disguise symbolism. Gnomes is the solution. This is also where Stan's mother works. So they continue this symbol throughout the show. I should briefly cover Chef. Note his name. Elroy MC symbol. MC's master of ceremonies to host. Elroy being facilitating young children who are comms-aware learning. Effectively a symbol of him being a guide for comms-aware kids to move up in the world. A perfect representation of what he does every episode. This could also help clarify other MC comms, but I'll get into that another time. Alien control, symbol of being MK'd and then imitating an owl singing about the moon, the 6th June. And spring, as in liftoff, a T for 2, symbol of getting information. Kyle screams into Cartman's ear which triggers the visitors to come. He throws a rock and they attack Kenny. Kenny then gets run over by the cows and Bar Brady finishes him off. This is the most famous running gag of South Park. That Kenny dies in every episode. The very first time being the defining one for the comms. In this case having Brady symbolism be the one to kill Kenny is telling. Kenny McCormick MK mirrored. Anyway. Cartman goes home and this is where we get into the most clear MK comm of the first episode. This was also the sequence that was the original teaser for South Park itself. So it in effect represents the show itself. A sequence where Cartman tells his mother he doesn't want to eat the massive amount of junk his mother has for him. She convinces him to eat more and more in a comedic way. This is the subtle manipulations to destroy a child that are done. It comes across as downright rude to not listen to your mother, and they put hard effort into making food for you, yet they are doing it to help destroy them. Also possibly make them more suitable for sex, as I suspect having sex given body size differences becomes less problematic the heavier a child weighs. In either case note how Cartman tells his mother to not let his bullying friends know he's there. Later in the show Cartman is shown much less the victim, but in the first episode it's clear it's entirely his mother. When his friends do come she forces him to go with them despite his protests and it clearly being an abusive relationship. More repetition of the Wendy throw-up joke. It works for a comm, but they cut it out as it wore thin as a joke early on in the show. The aliens use crop circles in context of wanting to communicate. Defined as a picture of Eric Cartman, but he views it as Tom Selleck, which was the origin of Chippendale the Disney show. And we talk again about the new dancing symbol. So this unites the two comms even more with the full Monty, as that whole plot was about Chippendales. Indiana Jones, indie film symbolism. As in people making their own movies. As for crop circles, those are advertisements for ops I believe. I've gone over a couple of examples that suggested a connection but not enough to be sure of that. So to get Ike back they have to go through Cartman. Note Stan wants to know when he gets to make sweet love, still driven by Chef's words. Cartman farts and sets fire to the cat. Good grief, a reference to Charlie Brown, an earlier in lineage show tied to MK with child psychology. His mother forces him to be abused with his friends after stuffing him with food. And they call Cartman a fraidy cat, that if he keeps farting, saying taboo, it'll force the aliens to come by and negotiate. As in exposing what is known about them having sex with Cartman. He is said to be like Rudolph, yet another MK comm. A story about what? A deer/DOE being abused until he becomes an asset with a red nose, drunk symbol. As in back then they would abuse people till they became suitable to get drunk and let loose against enemies. Cartman does summon the aliens. How? Instead of denying he was raped, he starts talking exclusively about things going in and out of his ass. Thus the aliens hear this and come down. These ops tie into big investments as we've gone into with Red Hat. Hundreds of millions of dollars for some, and this was back in the late 90s. Kyle first appeals to return his football kindly, and when this fails he begins cursing, asserting what the aliens like to do. That they like to have sex specifically. This causes Ike to come out of the spaceship and Kyle promises to take better care of his operation. Cartman on the other hand returns to the spaceship with periodic abductions, a part of his life. Which is juxtaposed with Chef getting ready to have sex. Wendy goes to kiss and he vomits. Same as before, though even more transparent with dissection of what it is he has done. Here we get to the cow/alien scene. They give them a gift to hypnotize the cop into leave them alone. This is all connected to an old cartoon about an owl and rabbit. Where an owl can't perform for the rabbit when parents are watching. So they give him support and freedom instead of controlling. In context, it is about being controlled and following comms. As in getting instructions to sing a specific set of lyrics, as his song was full of comms, and it doubles as a lesson on parents being overbearing, producing negative results. Having the kids be a part of ops with independence for growth. Cartman falls out of the sky with pink eye he got from a session with a celebrity. Pink eye being from feces getting into the eye. It also ties into the Pink Eye episode Halloween 1 with the crash of a space shuttle, note Russian International Space Station symbol. As well as the Japanese mafia with the mayor getting dressed with the Brady cop and stacks of cash. Pink eye equals getting feces, evidence, in the eyes of others. The zombie outbreak symbolizing exposure, as the mirror killed Kenny rather than the usual proxy. I.e., all heck breaks loose due to the sudden exposure, acts as a domino effect. People outraged and rioting over it. Chef sings his song about how someone is going to get laid, specifically to the children. Remember that the original use of pink eye was defined as a celebrity doing something bad to Cartman. Story is resolved by killing the original zombie, the one that began to expose things. Kill the one starting the court case and everything ends. Another to discuss is the season finale about who Cartman's father was. It focuses on his mother setting up his friends to see a tea party Cartman made. Note the mother creating humiliation situations. He calls the stuffed toy his best friend, with so many MK people filming. The creation of absurd situations allow for joke shows from such people. America's Funniest Home Videos. Looking at the dates of origin. January 14, 1990. First season of America's Funniest Home Videos, second actual episode. January 14, 1990. First regular episode of Simpsons, second actual episode. They timed both shows with irregular order. Thus both shows have the second episode on the same day. November 26, 1989. Debut of America's Funniest Home Videos. November 25, 1989. Final fight, Street Fighter II Origin. Understanding the Street Fighter connection requires understanding the goal as tied to politics. Street Fighter was timed to the Rodney King beating, and when you look at the art and timing, it's clear. Note also Street Fighter, Sagat, Tiger Spam. Bob Saget/Sagat. I go more into it here. Dungeons and Dragons with the nuclear connection. Bob Saget early in his career being a major in nuclear physics but being obsessed with a cult game. March 18, 1981. The Greatest American Hero begins airing with main character, Hinckley. March 30, 1981. President Reagan and others are shot by a man named Hinckley. That show itself was a marker for the assassination against Reagan. The plot being about a man as teacher for troubled students, i.e. MK'd. Let's combine a bunch of the symbolism topics we've discussed. Remember South Park in context of its location in Colorado. Colorado sports. Seattle sports. Japanese video games. Nintendo. Sony. 1997–1998. South Park. The most famous game of 1997 historically is Final Fantasy VII. Nintendo lost the console war to PlayStation in large part because Squaresoft left them to make this game for Sony. It's widely reported as an incredibly sore spot between them. Remember that Nintendo owned the Seattle baseball team at this time. So, what are the odds that the day the game came out Seattle would lose to something symbolizing Final Fantasy VII? 100% note the game. The vehicle of transportation is the tiny Bronco. The Broncos beat Seattle the day Final Fantasy VII was released. Ever looked closer at the set pieces for that game? It goes far beyond even that already damning connection. Avalanche as the name of the terrorist group. Same as the Denver hockey team. This was John Elway's first Super Bowl winning year. Their first Super Bowl loss was in 1977. I could go a lot deeper here, but it's best saved for a sports-focused post. You get the basic point though. That, as I've demonstrated in many posts, sports is rigged and is used to send comms. These comms tie into business, blackmail, and all sorts of other things. They seem to act as coordinating pieces for large-scale ops, but the precise nature of it eludes me. I have found that some are patriotic and have good motives, like the civil rights movement, so don't assume it's all bad just because they seem to be involved in market changes. I believe right now they are part of the entity helping fix the world, as is Nintendo for that matter. I have hesitation to say bad things knowing this, but so long as I explain the good with the bad, we should achieve something closer to enlightenment rather than mob mentality. I'm here to educate, not incite. I don't have all the answers, but I am trying to better myself and help others do the same. Let's learn what's going on before we assume the worst. We do not want to hurt the very people trying to pull us out of hell. We should want to join them and help lighten that surely heavy load. Anyway. 1997 was FF7, and of course that was also the year for South Park and Gnomes OS. And of course the full Monty. The full Monty, St. Elmo's Fire and Hot Stuff. Remember the gnome symbolism. This whole film is about men trying to become strippers with the only thing to offer is a willingness to show everything. It was the biggest film in UK until Titanic. Note the finale being tied to "You Can Leave Your Hat On" during the strip dance. Reconcile with Red Hat and South Park. It came out the same day as the Gnomes OS. August 13, 1997, South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997, GNOME Primary OS for Linux debut. August 15, 1997, Full Monty, New Employment by Stripping. Include scene with GNOME that decides job, leave your hat on. December 14, 1998, GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel/Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998, Gnomes episode, South Park 17. The most famous scene in the film is the hot stuff scene where the four wait in the line for employment and begin dancing due to their strip practice sessions. Prince Charles parodied it. I'll get into the potential meaning of that later, but the connection here I want to make is the song ties into the sequence with them practicing to Flashdance, which starred a metalworker stripper. The same story of the full Monty, as they are also steelworkers turned strippers. Meaning these stories are connected. There are quite a few connections I could make here. For example, a major part of Flashdance involves ice skating, but rather than focus on that, the sequence for Hot Stuff is most notable. It begins with the main character, Gaz, and his child convincing Man to steal a copy of Flashdance for them. Then they go to the unemployment line and begin thrusting as if having sex to dance to Hot Stuff. I'll go more into the symbolism of the kid later, but the names. Note Gaz is tied to a stag and Russian car plant. Note the co-star, Horsefall, was the king, stag, in Game of Thrones. DOE/stag party symbolism, Playboy. The kid shares a first name with the judo master we went over before, but that could be coincidence. The context of stealing Flashdance is a perfect reason why they had to switch to gnomes. It tells us that Flashdance itself was likely a symbol tied to similar comms going on in the early 80s. A transition. The actual story being a woman trying to become a big star, and so how do they allow people to be big stars? What was that comm with I Love Lucy? December 19, 1963, Jennifer Beals born Flashdance. December 19, 1963, first of many Kennedy conspiracy theorists to publish opinions that the November 22 assassination of President John F. Kennedy had been a conspiracy rather than the work of a lone gunman. Note her name Beals ties into an infection festering. Note the day of birth tying into the origin of JFK conspiracy theories. This would be a potential scandal, so it gets diffused through press control. Conspiracy theories to diffuse reality. The film took place during the quarterback class of 1983. The start of John A. Elway and Dan Constantine Marino. She was approached to star in St. Elmo's Fire but turned it down. St. Elmo's Fire, this may seem like a minor point, but I decoded before that it was tied to a generational shift. The Brat Pack, as they were then called. A reference to the Rat Pack. In each iteration it was a domination by a small group of actors. Note Demi Moore was highest paid in 1996, the year before the full Monty. Note also she starred in a stripping movie that year with a massive one. The same day coincided with Elmo appearing on Rosie O'Donnell for the first time. This was the year of Tickle Me Elmo as the hottest toy of all time by some measures. June 28, 1996. Elmo first appearance on Rosie, interrupts Regis Philbin and shows up as last guest. June 28, 1996. St. Elmo's Fire star, striptease Demi Moore highest paid U.S. actress of year. June 28, 1996. Nutty Professor equals taking it all off. St. Elmo's Fire and Tickle Me Elmo. Let's keep that in the back of our minds. At a glance you might not understand the Nutty Professor connection. I go over it here. I had already made the striptease connection to Nutty Professor. It makes no sense until you watch the originally Nutty Professor with comms in mind. The film symbolized JFK holding on to evidence as protection. This would be the MKUltra documents mysteriously found years later that kicked off the Senate hearings in 1977. Obviously they killed him anyway. The connection to the modern version is due to the symbolism change. Instead of having a loser turn into a rock star, it's of a fat man turning thin. The symbol becomes just like with striptease, of taking it all off. One of the most famous scenes of the movie is the main character ecstatic about being able to see his genitals. The new connection here is that it's the same day as Elmo first appeared on Rosie. Rosie O'Donnell is where the hype for the toy began by most accounts online. I decoded Tickle Me Elmo partially last post, created by a man named Hyman. Symbol of what? Flashdance was 1983, which just so happens to have been the same year of the only toy rush to rival Tickle Me Elmo. The Cabbage Patch Dolls. Cabbage just like lettuce in South Park, symbolizing money plus kids. Made by ColecoVision, who had just lost the console war to Atari and yet dominated the market in a new way, with the following year Nintendo taking the market. I dug into Tickle Me Elmo and noticed during the year of the Elmo craze the first episode involved a sequence. The first being masked dancers before Elmo counts. Then blind, then moonshine, followed by Elmo and a whale demonstrating love. Followed by cats. Tickle Me Elmo is also tied to child abuse allegations as the second puppeteer quit due to them. September 17, 1960. Kevin Jeffrey Clash born first Elmo puppeteer. September 17, 1960. The blacksmith dodges blacksmith plans his wedding to his mail-order bride Mueller. The same day the puppeteer was born, an episode about a big wedding on one of the biggest show of the day, Gunsmoke. The blacksmith, just like steel worker. A bride named Mueller to be married. I believe this concept of Elmo being fire red is symbolism of St. Elmo's Fire. If the resignation was a comm, then I suspect it ties into needing to keep the blackmail more secret. Note also the puppeteer who took over for him was born the same day as one of the most famous moments in TV history. The famous finale to Saint Elsewhere, which shows the whole show, was just imagined by an autistic child. May 25, 1988. 10st Elsewhere finale entire series imagined by autistic child. May 25, 1988. Ryan Dillon born second Elmo puppeteer. Note the cat for the ending was killed during the ending and then died right after officially. Saint Elsewhere is mostly known today due to the famous theory that all shows are part of that autistic dream. Snow Globe World, and so I dug into Tommy Westphal. Note his first appearance was All About Eve, which was a famous film that began Marilyn Monroe's career. Discussion of Peter Pan. Symbol of blackmail, note the Roosevelt Hotel being a major part of it. Which brings us back to Teddy Roosevelt. December 14, 1983, Rhesus Monkey Russia launch. December 14, 1983, Tommy Westphal debut Saint Elsewhere. I decoded these launches in the past to be just like the John Benet Ramsey comms. Her death coincided with one of these Rhesus Monkey launches, and there aren't that many of them. Recess equals a child's free time. The autistic symbol is in a child who can't speak about what happens to them. Same as Hello Kitty symbolism. No mouth. Also in the top 3 for top-selling media franchises of all time. September 18, 1987, DuckTales. September 18, 1987, Where's Wally Where's Waldo origin. September 19, 1987, Hello Kitty's Furry Tale Theater CBS. June 5, 1974, Chad Allen Lazari born Tommy Westphal All in His Head. June 4, 1974, Seattle Seahawks established in the Virginia Mason Athletic Center. Which brings us back to Seattle. Some of these are likely coincidental. I make quick connections and see if the patterns begin piling up or breaking away. The more I do, the more clear my vision gets as more patterns become apparent in one direction rather than another. I may be wrong about individual points, but the direction I'm decoding is rarely wrong. Some decodes like nuclear have been confirmed in hundreds of different ways by me. In this very post I decoded it using new metrics I hadn't applied before, the fascism medal of Enrico Fermi and Marie Curie in relation to Judo, and once again reached the same conclusion. The things that are true tend to do that, they are true, so that means they fit into the larger comms world, and I'll hit them sooner or later no matter the direction I take. For example, the very last thing I'm doing in this post is checking to see if Elmo's comms verify my theory by going into his interviews and shows around this date. What I found was yes, I'm now confident of it. Note in Elmo's second to last appearance on Rosie O'Donnell's show it's about the Super Bowl and a fire at Sesame Street. This is the first Super Bowl Tom Brady won. I talked about him in relation to this before, and note the discussion Elmo has with Rosie. Elmo talks about how attracted he is to Beyoncé and Destiny's Child. Rosie talks about failing nap time after Elmo brings up sleeping. Note the same week of this special a nuclear fire in Japan. February 3, 2002, Tom Brady leads the New England Patriots to win their first Super Bowl. February 3, 2002, S33, E3 Elmo's World episode Sleep premiered on PBS during 33rd season of Sesame Street. February 4, 2002, Elmo fire at Hooper's store. February 6, 2002, Elmo talks to Rosie O'Donnell about the fire and Beyoncé. February 9, 2002, fire at nuclear plant in Japan. In a recent post I discussed how Beyoncé was tied to those sleep ops, so this fits. However, it doesn't explain what these comms mean. What does Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl have to do with hiding evidence? Well, that is why it's a good thing I keep digging. Note the Super Bowl comms with U2 playing the halftime show. Well, I've gone over U2 as well. May 1, 1960, U2 incident begins with Gary Powers being shot down by USSR. May 10, 1960, Bono of U2 fame born. May 10, 1960, Soviet communications about Gary Powers. Note their debut album was viewed as pedophilic. By itself this could just be an oddity, but pay close attention to these next two images and timelines. March 22, 2001. No Child Left Behind introduced. March 23, 2001. Famously bad Simpsons wrestling game debut. March 24, 2001. U2 tour begins, All That You Can't Leave Behind Elevation Tour, Bono famously falls off stage. June 25, 2001. Tomb Raider U2 soundtrack released. June 25, 2001. FBI director change succeeded by Mueller. January 8, 2002. Bush signs No Child Left Behind into law. January 8, 2002. Wendy's founder Dave Thomas death. February 3, 2002. U2 halftime show Super Bowl plus Tom Brady. On the right there, that YouTube channel calling Tomb Raider Tom Brady unlocked this connection, that it was a symbol for taking evidence. Tomb raiding, as in taking evidence, and her symbolism with sex is to imply the precise kind of evidence. It fits with U2 doing Tom Raider music and being at the Super Bowl with Brady. All of it coinciding with Mueller, the changing in heads of the FBI. That explains what and how evidence was being moved. The No Child Left Behind connection with the U2 Can't Leave Behind not just timed with the origin but timed with the completion. No Child Left Behind symbolizing perhaps not leaving any evidence. That part is less clear to me, but it seems to have been incredibly important to some people then. The Simpsons wrestling connection as well, a famously bad game. Simpsons tie into the surveillance ops/nuclear as I go into frequently, so, wrestling, with the Simpsons fits as that would be a way to say sex. All together, and looking at the Elmo comms of failing nap time makes it sound like some kind of evidence was looming. Dave Thomas death timed to it. Father of Wendy, and as discussed, those are the same kinds of comms. Elmo the Red Fire puppet. And Saint Elmo's witching fire. Remember that Saint Elmo was based on Erasmus. What are the odds they would name a comet Erasmus and discover it the same day of the Hot Stuff video? Well, whatever the odds, it happened. It happened the same day Hurricane Teddy hit its peak as well as the Bradshaw Bunch aired. Brady Com. Erasmus. September 17, 2020. Hot Stuff video made YouTube. September 17, 2020. Erasmus comet discovered. September 17, 2020. Hurricane Teddy 140 miles per hour 220 kilometers h. September 17, 2020. The Bradshaw Bunch E. September 18, 2020. Armenia Film Festival Lady Gaga 9/11 short film. The Mueller connection could be the symbol of not going after people that were connected with that. A symbolic, we won't investigate this, as that guy is the one overseeing the investigations. It fits as a symbol if that is the origin. There was another Erasmus too. One that coincided with Howdy Doody ending as Mickey Mouse Club took over the ratings. September 24, 1960. Howdy Doody show ends. September 24, 1960. Erasmus discovered. September 24, 1960. First nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Enterprise launch. This leads us to great news actually, because now that we understand Erasmus as a comm for these blackmailing security ops using kids. What do you think the new Erasmus comet symbolized? As it turns out, there is yet another Erasmus. A UK program for exchange students. A perfect symbol for this very practice, and guess when it ended? September 17, 2020. Hot Stuff video made YouTube. September 17, 2020. Erasmus comet discovered. September 17, 2020. Hurricane Teddy 140 miles per hour 220 kilometers h. September 17, 2020. The Bradshaw Bunch E. December 24, 2020. UK leaves Erasmus program. December 24, 2020. Pam Anderson marries bodyguard. December 24, 2020. Sex doll is broken. I also include some curious dates for when it began in that image, but those are less conclusive. The GIF one I included because it's both tied to computers and GIF peanut butter based on past decodes is tied to this kind of stuff. The fact that a song about committing sin by Pet Shop Boys, like buying a child from window, is particularly suspect given Elton John performed it later. A person connected to Rocket Man, as Trump would call the NK leader. The Keith Hernandez one is a fictional date from a famous Seinfeld episode one tried to decode in past posts but was unable to fully do so. If I had more time this new lead might crack it, but the post is full as it is. Let's focus on the hot stuff connection. November 13, 1998. Prince Charles dances to Hot Stuff in parody of the full Monty. November 13, 1998. Michel Trudeau killed in freak accident in the California Rocky Mountains. November 12, 1998. Will Perry named NK Policy Coordinator. November 11, 1998. Tencent Tech Company founded. This may be irrelevant, but given what I've decoded, the comms likely imply Michel Trudeau had to fake a death due to hot stuff. Hot stuff being the most famous scene from the full Monty. So let's finally decode that film. June 1, 2000. Dave Thomas, Wendy's, Adoption Foundation U.S. Postal Service. June 1, 2000. Full Monty debut Los Angeles. October 26, 2000. Full Monty debut Broadway. October 26, 2000. PlayStation 2 launched USA. The Full Monty equals full exposure / nudity. The Full Monty. Just to recap again, the gnome and hat connection between the two. August 13, 1997. South Park debut. Plus 2 days. August 15, 1997. GNOME Primary OS for Linux debut. August 15, 1997. Full Monty, new employment by stripping. Include scene with GNOME that decides job, leave your hat on. December 14, 1998. GNOME's primary backer, Red Hat, sells to Intel / Netscape. Plus 2 days. December 16, 1998. GNOME's episode, South Park 17. That GNOME connection being one I went over extensively last post. A story about gnomes that steal underwear when people sleep and profit from it. Story focuses on a child they are driving insane. Full Monty begins with a discussion of the old steel industry. A man who previously worked in the steel industry and is now perpetually unemployed. I highlight Mark Addy as the co-star as he played Robert Baratheon, the Stag King in Game of Thrones. Note the discussion of the town thriving with steel industry and people playing in a pool. Large body of water equals symbol of comms network. I've gone over steel factory comms before. They tie into the earliest example I've found of a blackmail hotel as well, a book about a vampire with girls that seduce powerful men. April 30, 1897. Russia, Red October Steel Factory founded. May 26, 1897. Dracula Bram Stoker book Russia as villain. November 1, 1897. Astor opened 16-story Astoria luxury hotel. I believe steel is important in regard to double meanings because the industry lays the foundation for funding operations. Operations that are tied to blackmail, thus steel becomes steel as they blackmail the powerful into their fold. Check prior posts for more on the Astors and Dracula. Anyway, the video switches from a pool to soccer. A game about passing, and there is a reason Telstar satellites look like soccer balls. Soccer symbolizing moving data from one to another and the pool symbolizing the environment. Then it discusses the nightclub life when the fun really starts. Fast forward 25 years with no industry, and we have the main character Gaz, Russian stag plus steel symbol, stealing a rusty girder with his young son and trying to keep it a secret. Having his kid be involved in ops. Much like Constantine, only note it's a sinking ship, and he drops the girder into the water. They find out his friend's wife Jean is enthralled by naked men, and they bust into the woman's night. The end result is they decide to go, the full Monty, to go further than Chippendales and take everything off to make money. Chippendales is a com I covered prior as it connected to children around the same timeframe. Literally a popular kids cartoon with the same name as a strip joint. November 19, 1990, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers end of show. October 27, 1990, Chippendales' famous SNL skit, Rejecting the Amateur. The symbol is tied to the spying ops. All about visibility. The transition in those ops was of ending what was an amateur perversion ring. That's why Chris Farley is replaced by a more attractive man. Getting the job. This whole movie is about getting the job of stripping and including his kid. Note he brings his kid into the strip show for women and the kid instantly starts drinking. Then they watch a woman urinate like a man from inside the stalls. The point is best understood with South Park clarification as it ties into the GNOME OS. Note the old computers at the employment center. The discussion of the strippers. Then discussion how they would be willing to expose more than they do. Calling the main characters fat and ugly, same concept as the Chippendales end com. Why would anyone want to see that exposed? The wife offers to give him a job black hole. He refuses throughout the film to get a job, and instead he meets a suicidal man. They then contemplate his options for death. That he has no friends. This is what is actually being discussed to be exposed. It's not the main character who is the hero so much as it's giving an example of what needs to be kept an eye on. This will become more clear later, but just consider this suicidal man in reference to those Constantine comms we went over. That someone on the edge is given a push to become a murderer. Keeping an eye on those people, the full Monty, is tracking dangerous criminals. Just like in South Park someone is keeping an eye on the dangerous ones. Some of the comms aren't as clear like Chinese, it could be tying it to ops based from there with data collection. Teaching them to dance is the only one with any kind of standing. The head of the employment center and the one that owns the gnomes. The various gnomes symbolizing watching. With criminals putting them in danger. This ties into the more prominent scene. When rejected for help they take his gnomes. And smash them, costing him his new job. They patch up the gnome and become friends. Putting it next to a wishing well, as this is all about getting jobs in spying. Spying on low-income people that could otherwise be dangerous. Seeing everything. This includes kids. This is no place for kids, as the kid is right there being made to watch grown men strip. Note the descriptions of him. Serial killer written on his face, and they steal a movie Flash Dance. A movie about a steel-working woman who becomes a stripper. They proclaim they could do better. Most famous scene in movie, Flash Dance. I already went into this. Thrusting, waiting for a job. Note the group is separated by other men, and they thrust into them as if having sex. Anyway, in the film Gaz just got out of prison. Refuses to get a job, but keeps exposing his kid to crime and sex. Ends up taking his child's life savings to strip. Then they play soccer. Already went over those kinds of comms, and hyping up their show of everything. Once again stealing. Everything in this film you could argue is things you'd want someone to keep tabs on. It's a justification for why regular people need to be spied on. South Park is similar, it's also about the job opportunities tied to it. A way for people on the lower end of the clown scale to move up in the world while providing a public service. At least that seems to be the theory. And so while the men were stripping they get arrested and viewed as likely crimes against children. All of it caught on video. The kid has the cop's hat on. As it seems he's the one keeping an eye on the rest. And after it's all done with the arrest, seemingly the culmination of his spying was to bring a criminal into police custody. The end of the spying ops. The gnome breaks. Obviously these kinds of spy ops aren't meant to last forever. In two different prominent gnome symbols I found the ops are defined as lasting precisely 1 year. One of which being David the gnome, whose protagonist is 399 years old, and gnomes are said to live to exactly 400 years old. The first episode has him nursing a DO back to health. After 1 year, from 399 to 400 gnomes all become giant trees. Another example I've recently dug up is below there. A game called Soul Blazer, which was an early SNES game. Gnomes there live 1 year as well. That game also helps clarify a few points. For one thing, it demonstrates that these ops were going on consistently from the mid-80s to late 90s at the very least, but the plot itself is of note. One particular part of the game has you as an avatar of God. In this game you trade seeds to talking squirrel in exchange for a psycho sword, which can stun otherwise invincible monsters. Seed symbolism being funding and psycho sword being an MK victim. Hard to define MK usage better than that. Being able to attack otherwise protected enemies by using a mentally unstable person. The game also has a boy named Teddy and girl named Lisa. Teddy being boy whose mother forces him to give you free goat food so that you can trade it for the secrets of a goat. This ties into getting a dream rod, which the character breaks into the house of a Lisa and then spies on their dreams. Symbolism for breaking into the computer as Lisa is a symbol for a computer, as I've gone into in many posts. No room to go over it again, so just check the last 2 posts if you don't remember why that means that. The point is, these ops seem to be defined as yearly for adults with an option to continue as necessary. So they pick a job of spying on a subject of interest and then report on them for 1 year. If it turns out a longer time is necessary, then a dog can be used to symbolize a longer op. The life of a dog being the entirety of the op, which could potentially last well over a decade, but that's for another post. Though I will say one person I've heard of who was MK'd had a handler, the only one that lasted more than a year, got a dog the year they were introduced by the name Sadie Mae. Symbol of Manson, though there's a lot more to the connection than just that. Future subject. There was also a dog named Shasta, though that one didn't last long, as I suspect the MK process wasn't proceeding as well as expected. By talking about the dog online, they were likely able to send messages about progress. They acted as a friend until the dog died, signifying the end of the operation. Most involved with building of trauma situations and attempts to create a killer, or once this failed, to simply have the person die. However, because they don't kill directly, most attempts for death were manipulations. Things like convincing a person to do something that they don't realize will lead to their death. Failing that, simply trying to increase pressure until they kill themselves. Anyway, so in the full Monty, the ops are a success as it all becomes a giant news story. This ties into how the spying can be profitable, the spying and turned into media. It is promoting the goal as effectively it is investigative journalism. Or so they seem to spin it. Which makes the criminals famous, and they use it to make money as strippers. A happy ending for the criminal, though the symbolism is of them being exposed. It has to work for the audience. It's a joke really, though there is some truth in people using infamy as a bridge to stardom and money making. Full exposure conclusion, as this is the opening of many people beginning gnome operations. So just like with South Park, it's about a kid, but it's framed as being about a parent trying to strip to somehow be a good father. It's insane given he is offered a job several times but focuses all his efforts on illegal schemes while trying to get his kid to commit crimes with him. Just like with Cartman, the point seems to be in tracking people like him. I could go much further, but it's time to wrap this post up. The next topic came from the decode from a reader. Spleen. So this YouTube channel below is new, but the author is the internet historian. It's this small channel where he just reads the plots of video games and calls it Explained. I noticed a few comms, and when I brought it up to some readers, one suggested that spleen symbolism as for fighting off bad cells. I think he was right, and it gives us another body calm for the future. In this one above, he talks about how shutting down the airplanes would kill the ability to send murderers like Hitman 47, cloned murderer made of various criminals. I went over Tom Raider earlier, and that was a good clue, and this one. The Living Dead and showing Prince Philip. This was just before he died. Prince Philip died when he was 99 years old on April 9th, the 99th day of the year. I went over his death and many other celebrities that clearly were comms. I believe it's all leading to exposure, as what better way to shock people into accepting any incredible story is by bringing people back from the dead. February 2, 2021. Rush Limbaugh final show before leaving. February 2, 2021. End of the world. Elon Musk warns of civilization collapse if we don't leave Earth. February 17, 2021. Rush Limbaugh death. February 17, 2021. ISS arrival spaceship. April 9, 2021. Prince Philip dies 99 years old on the 99th day of the year, which was the 9th. April 9, 2021. ISS arrival spaceship. Rush first was diagnosed with cancer the same day the coronavirus hit the US, but I won't be going over that again. The point is his death, and Prince Philip was timed to an international space launch. Symbolism of sending people far away. Okay, now for a real update. Elon Musk tweeting about jeans, and this too was a reader noticed pattern. Someone noticed he had tweeted jeans, and Musk had done the same. Updates, jeans. That kind of pattern is hugely helpful when brought to my attention. Even if you can't decode it, just being able to identify this is not just a huge first step, but will give me exactly what I need to show you where to take it from there. Elon Musk plus Kanye both focusing on jeans. So I look up other gene-related news recently. The two biggest promoted stories of actual genes both involve something old from over 20 years ago. One being $17/Q. The other by a rat. Note also two people named Gene, one dead film creator, the other opening a lawsuit under new laws in New York for sex abuse victims. So, which, if any of these, are connected? Well, when I look into each thread a few patterns jump out. The most clear one being legal symbolism. Note Elon Musk's tweet was in context of Obama DOJ investigation and learning truth. With that in mind, I look into the most clear connection there, which is the new laws in New York for old abuse cases. This could be very big. Note the lady suing named Jean was tied not just in Playboy, but her fame began in 1993. That is the same year as Britney Spears and Ryan Gosling. Which is meaningful because Ryan Gosling is the guy in the woke jeans ad Musk highlighted. Furthermore, note the pants themselves. MC Hammer symbolism also tying to legal. I can say then that this is likely about the new laws in New York allowing for new cases. The reason why Trump is being sued is perhaps to bring attention to this new thing they have to be worried about. There are likely many people this applies to, and the only way to message all of them at once is by giving them a message they will hear, as they would be keenly watching anything negative that pushes against Trump. So it's all good news. This also helps clarify a few other things, like what was likely being sent as a comm back in 2017. They were invoking the MC Hammer comms with asserting legal challenges would not touch them, and the same is true here. This explains why Musk asked, "What does your genes tell you?" as in symbolism of, are they actually untouchable by the law? Note the most popular JonTron video, most algo pushed, is this one released the same day as this Levi's ad. September 30, 2017. JonTron top video, waterproofing my life with flex tape. September 30, 2017. SNL Levi's skit with Ryan Gosling. Note teddy bear comms attached to Assange and Snowden. Implying the kind of material they had been, that kind of blackmail I've been discussing. In this case, the symbol was in to stop blood from flowing, stop leaking information/court cases. Explains why it was so pushed. Whole video makes sense now, done by computer, and all the allusions to the guy being a psychopath to be feared. One final thing about Elon Musk. If you recall, much earlier in the post I decoded Erasmus. A key point was that the Erasmus program had been shut down. The ending of those ops. This may explain why Elon Musk has frequently talked about declining birth rates. I had wondered about this because the human population is always said to be increasing dramatically, but understanding the end of Erasmus. He might be talking about no new stars. There is no longer the same function to secure them to strings. Blackmail. This is why we need to fix the world and remove the truly evil parts so that instead of people being controlled by blackmail and scared into submission by threats of violence, we might have open discourse for once. I contend there will be a revolution in thought and rapid progress far beyond anything seen in human history. I want a world that fosters positive growth rather than negative. When people understand things, they will be able to excise the demons within themselves. Nothing can be done if nothing can be seen, so I'll keep doing my part to make it visible. Though I think before we get to true exposure, I've come to think there may need to be a Bowser, so to speak. A big bad villain to focus everyone's anger on, so as to buffer what comes after. This is because Trump is still the big bad for many on the left and Trump remains the only figure that has any kind of star power on the right. Add those points together and the most likely path forwards to me is an op to make the hate subside by putting it onto someone else. Then either Trump can return or effectively pass the baton to someone. That's my guess anyway. Telegram chat. Join our Telegram group. Send leads, begin decoding. This has been Sedated in Seattle.